Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. It's that time again. It's the Happy Hour with your host, Dr. Paul, and his lovely wife, Nancy Collins. So without any further ado, or funny stuff, here's Dr. Paul Collins and his wife Nancy with some hopefully awesome rhyming. Take it away, Dr. Paul.
Hello, Matthew. Thank you very much. Matthew Dillon Pearson, our station manager, and today our chief engineer. In fact, he's the chiefest of all the chief engineers. We're grateful for Matthew. Some people call him Matt. Anyway, Nancy, this is the Happy Hour.
I know, that's right.
And I'm old Dr. Paul, and I'm with my sweet little Miss Nancy. And we were going to have a guest today, if the guest couldn't make it, high water or something. So Nancy and I are carrying on because we have a lot of good information for you.
Well, you know, that high water is very dangerous, Dr. Paul.
It is. Don't drown, turn around. Turn around, don't drown.
Okay, real quick, what happened to me this morning on my way into the office?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there's that spot on Chestnut Expressway, right under that underpass there with Chestnut and 44.
Right.
Deceptively deep. It did not look like it was that deep, and I hit it going about 30 miles an hour.
Uh-huh.
And long story short, I'm very surprised that I even made it through it because it was probably up to my doors, and it wasn't going very fast. When I hit it, it was almost like I slammed on my brakes. Everything went flying forward, and it was going real slow till I got up out of it, and then it moved. But it also messed up a little piece of my bumper. I got to get some new plastic clips to hold my bumper on, and there's a plastic
How about
piece.
some twist ties?
You know, I could probably do that with black ones. They wouldn't be noticeable. But then it also pulled, like, the force of it pushed that plastic cover that goes on the inside of the wheel well up over the tire. So
Sounds like heap big problem to me.
be very, very careful out there.
Yeah,
Well-
I think I heard on the TV this morning we had like 4 inches.
Yes.
4 inches of rain in this area.
Yeah, it
That's a
was-
lot. We've had a lot of rain so far this year.
Yes. I went to bed very early last evening, and during the night, I heard it raining and thundering and carrying on, and I didn't realize we were going to have so much. But right now in Springburg, USA, now mind you, folks, we're in Springfield, Missouri, United States of America. We are in the middle of the world, but I like to call my favorite adopted city, Springfield, I like to call it Springburg. It's Spring, B-U-R-G, Berg, Springburg, USA. And right now in Springburg, the temperature is 62 degrees, and we're having rain. So I don't know what it is where you are, but that's the way it is here on this particular day, May 22. I'm dating this program. That's all right, because some of you will watch it later, and you'll say, oh, that's the way it was on
You're
May.
dating this program?
Yeah, May 22.
Why didn't you bring it flowers?
Oh, I don't know. My wife is with me, and I barely got
I'm
away.
glad you got that joke. I would have felt that if I
I
would
got
have.
it.
You're
I
pretty
got it.
witty, Dr. Paul.
All right.
Pretty quick.
Anyway, belated happy birthday to Shirley Simpson, my first secretary. I think her birthday was like last week, and I may have mentioned it last week. But in case I didn't, Shirley, happy birthday. And she's in St. Joe, Missouri. Hello to Jerry Chambers, my teenager who grew up, became a school administrator, and is now retired. He was a teenage boy in my church. I helped him with his God and Country Award in St. Joe, Missouri. And Jerry Chambers is over in Chesterfield, Missouri. Jerry, hello. Greetings to you on this rainy, cool day from Springburg, USA. Also, Judy Nickel and Galen Garrett, our ladies in Texas. Both of them are definitely deep in the heart of Texas. And hello to the folks up in the Kansas City area. Northeast Missouri, been in touch with them. And folks in central Missouri, where I originated. And other places we'll think of as we go along. Other countries, Germany, Pakistan, South America, France, etc. And some new viewers here locally that that tune in because they've been guests on this show. Nancy, we've had some wonderful, wonderful guests on this program.
I know.
I mean, I don't want to offend anybody to accidentally leave you out, but one of our favorites, of course, is our little medical doctor, Dr. Jamie Durfee. Beautiful young woman, and she's going to be back on when this virus thing has run its course so that she can do such things. We've also had another medical doctor, a good friend of ours for many years, who also happens to be an ordained minister, Dr. Jonathan Clark. And then we had Dr. Phil Lloyd, and Phil is the owner of Cherry Health Center. I'm getting a call from Arlington, Texas. I'm wondering who that could be. Maybe it's one of ours. Hold
Maybe
on,
it's
folks.
Judith Ann.
Hello. Yes, it is. All right. Well, we will. Yeah, you tell Mark we will reschedule him for sometime in June. In the meantime, I will let folks know that he's
Those of you don't
making
know.
sure somebody doesn't get wet down in. And where'd you say? Branson. Okay. All right. Thanks for the word. Appreciate it. Bye. Well,
You know,
no.
I had a lawyer that was representing me do that in the courtroom one time.
Well, you know, this is the
Ask the
wonderful
judge's
thing
permission.
about live TV. That was a phone call from one of the partners of Mark Wright. Mark was going to be our guest today. Mark had an emergency call to Branson, somebody with a major roof problem, and it's raining in Branson. And Mark was a state representative for, I think, 8 years, right out of Baptist Bible College, back when he was very young. And term limits caught him, and he is one of the owners of a major roofing company out of Nixa, Missouri. And, of course, right now, roofers are in demand, especially if you have a major problem. Knowing Mark as I do, that had to be a really big, major thing for him to drop everything and take off for Branson. So whatever the problem is there in Branson, which for those of you who don't live in this area, Branson is a little town of about 12,000, 10,000, 11,000 people, I guess, south of us, 40 miles. It's a little entertainment center. They have more theater seats there than any place in the world, and more live performances. But they've been on shutdown. They're just starting to barely reopen a little at a time, and social distancing and cleaning between shows and all kinds of things going on because of this so-called coronavirus, COVID-19. All right, Nancy, we also had as a guest Dr. Hal Higdon, Chancellor of Ozark Technical Community College, which is a huge, huge school, 20-some thousand students and about half a dozen different campuses, main campus being here in Springfield. I had the privilege of teaching for them about 10 years, and I enjoyed every minute of it. So, Dr. Higdon, if you're listening and watching, you ever need somebody to come and fill in, just give old Dr. Paul a call. I'll gladly show up. I love those students, love teaching. Nancy,
that's right.
who else have we had that I don't want to overlook some. Oh, we've had Dee Wampler,
I was
one of the
just thinking.
best known defense attorneys in the nation, and an author of several books, great books. We've had him a couple of times. And of course, I was mentioning Dr. Philip Lloyd when the phone rang, and with the explanation about Mark. Then let's see.
Remember Bobby, the pharmacist?
Oh, Bobby, the pharmacist, a beautiful lady. We had her here to talk about the pharmaceutical industry. We ended up talking about killing hogs. She's a hog hunter. Back where I grew up in North Missouri, annually we'd have hog killing time. Well, for Bobby and her husband, it's a sport. They go to Texas, and when she was talking about hunting wild hogs, I figured they used a rifle. No, bow and arrow. Remember, she showed up then the second time we had her. She had her bow with her to show what she uses to. And, you know, that's got to be really some kind of experience. But Bobby's eager to be on, and she'll be back probably in the month of June. Let's see, who else have we had that would make, we want to make sure we don't leave somebody out. We've had so many wonderful guests. Oh, Billy Burris, great man of God, and he'll be taking part in the telethon, I imagine, that's coming up, playing the keyboards and playing favorite songs so people will call in. And anyway, we'll think of some more in a little bit, I'm sure.
That'll be on Thursday.
That'll be on Thursday.
That Thursday of the telethon.
That's the first week of June.
That'd be the 4th, I think, because the 5th.
Oh,
is-
5th is a monumental day.
I mean, it's like Jesus came to Springfield. In fact, he sent somebody.
Fifth is the raffle. The raffle and live auctions.
Well, the 5th is really a big deal.
Nancy's referring to my birthday,
Your birthday.
June the 5th.
To the 5th.
You're
Yeah.
gonna be 87.
No, not quite. I'll be 85. And very pleased to make that announcement. I mean, a lot of guys are not privileged to make that announcement. A lot of women aren't. But I plan on being around here on 5 years later for the happy announcement that I made 90 and going strong. Anyway, Nancy, we had talked about last time, kind of once in a while saying something relative to senior citizens and the elderly and the care for them. And of course, Nancy is a retired nurse her entire career. She did geriatrics. Well, next Friday on this broadcast, we will have a lady, longtime employee of Maranatha Village.
Oh, yeah.
And it's Maranatha is where Nancy worked 32 years. Maranatha is a retirement village that happens to have a couple of nursing home units. And Jenny Hall will be our guest, and she is the administrator.
Yep. She's been
She-
there, I don't know how long.
She's a long-time employee out there and finally became administrator, very experienced. She has a lot of knowledge, a lot of information to bring to us, especially right now with nursing homes shut down because of COVID-19. And but Maranatha, for those who don't know it, is a major player in the nursing home industry, not only in Springburg, USA, but in state of Missouri and the nation. Pardon me. Maranatha Village is 100 acres on the north side of Springfield, 100 acres. And they have people living there in single-family homes, in duplexes, fourplexes, apartment buildings, etc., every kind of dwelling imaginable. Beautiful little lake for fishing. They have a walking trail that's paved all around over the place, and they have an exercise room, and they have great dining facilities. Anyway, we'll talk a lot about that next week when we have Jenny Hall as our guest. Nancy, I thought yesterday this is the last broadcast of Axe Media Group before Memorial Day. So, how much more appropriate could it be than for us to consider Memorial Day? It's an American holiday observed on the last Monday of May, so this coming Monday is Memorial Day. Of course, Matt and his crew, they'll be on the air on Monday, but
Yes, we will.
it honors the men and women who died while serving in the U.S. military. So that's Monday, May the 25th. And let's see, what else can I tell you about Memorial Day before we get into some of my memories of it. Originally known as Decoration Day. And I remember that.
Mama always called it Decoration Day.
Yeah, my mom did too. And my mom would go out and she had a lot of irises. We called them flags. And
Mother did too.
And cut those flags and
Yeah.
take them to the cemetery. It originated in the years following the Civil War and became an official federal holiday in 1971. Took it a long time to become an official holiday. Many Americans observe Memorial Day by visiting cemeteries or memorials, holding family gatherings, and participating in parades. Unofficially, it marks the beginning of the summer season. This year, it will be different because of the COVID-19. But Matt Pearson, did you know that I guess this is that time when Itus Virtus, the motorcycle group that's primarily veterans, will be putting wreaths on veterans' graves.
Yeah, they do that during Christmas too. I
So,
think they put flags on the graves and then wreaths. I think during Christmas.
well, they do a good job of
I'm not
attending.
100% on that though.
They attend to the fallen heroes, that's for sure.
They do.
And what a wonderful bunch of guys. In fact, Acts Ministry has enjoyed a great relationship with Itus Virtus. That's I-T-U-S, that's the first word, and then Virtus, V-I-R-T-U-S, Itus Virtus. So anyway, the Civil War, which ended in the spring of 1865, claimed more lives than any conflict in U.S. history and required the establishment of the country's first national cemeteries. Do you happen to recall the first national cemetery and how we got it? I can tell you. Arlington National Cemetery, and it is on the land that was the plantation that was owned by General Robert E. Lee, who headed up the Confederate forces, and with their defeat, the government took over his plantation, and it is the site of Arlington National Cemetery. I have been to Arlington. It's very impressive. I've been there and watched the changing of the guards at with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That is really something. And if I think one time on this program, months and months and months ago, I presented information about the details of the changing of the guard.
Yeah, that.
You talk about a commitment.
Oh man.
They are, you commit to that group, you are forever a part of that group, and very limited in any other activity. And you study all the time.
It's almost like being in the priesthood.
Oh, even
something.
it's more demanding even
Yeah,
than that.
sure.
You need to look up the changing of the guard at Arlington, and you will be amazed. That's the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. It's plural now because there's more than one who's interred there in that tomb. And they're
Oh
unknown.
wow! Isn't that Tibetan? Isn't that awesome? You know what is it? The unknown soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that neat? There's just nothing unknown with God.
That's right.
That God knows.
He
We
knows
don't-
who they are.
I know. Whoa.
But there's probably remnants of families of those three unknowns who never received any confirmation as to what happened to their loved one.
Yeah.
And their loved one could be one of the unknowns. It's
Yeah.
very possible.
And what? Oh, this is neat. A neat idea. That when they pass on, maybe the first person that they will see besides Jesus will be that person.
Mm-hmm. There, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
That's a good observation. The Civil War ended in the spring of 1865. It claimed like 600,000 lives, and the population of this country was only about 12 million total, north and south.
Oh my goodness.
By the late 1860s, Americans in various towns and cities had begun holding springtime tributes to these fallen soldiers, decorating their graves with flowers and reciting prayers. Notice reciting prayers. Did you know each year on Memorial Day, a national moment of remembrance takes place at 3 o'clock p.m., your local time? So wherever you will be Monday at 3 o'clock your time, there will be a national moment of remembrance, like at least a minute of silence, wherever you are next Monday. Now, it's unclear where exactly this tradition originated. Numerous different communities may have independently initiated the memorial gatherings. And some records show that one of the earliest Memorial Day commemoration was organized by a group of freed slaves in Charleston, South Carolina, less than a month after the Confederacy surrendered in 1865. Nevertheless, in 1966, the federal government declared Waterloo, New York, the official birthplace of Memorial Day. We have Waterloo, New York, Waterloo, Iowa, and Waterloo, England, where Napoleon met his Waterloo, you know? Okay. Waterloo, which first celebrated the day on May 5th, 1866, was chosen because it hosted an annual community-wide event during which businesses closed and residents decorated the graves of soldiers with flowers and flags. Okay. On May the 5th, 1868, General John A. Logan, leader of an organization for Northern Civil War veterans, called for a nationwide day of remembrance later that month. The 30th of May, 1868, I'm quoting here, is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers, that is, scattering flowers, or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion. That's what they called the people in the North called somebody's got a horn going off somewhere. Anyway, the people in the North called the Civil War the War of the Rebellion, and the people in the South called it the War of Northern Aggression. We've come to know it as the Civil War. Now those bodies were lying in every city, village, and hamlet, churchyard in the land, he proclaimed. So, Memorial Day is coming up, Nancy. What, besides your mom calling it Decoration Day and cutting iris and calling them flags, what are some of your other memories about Memorial Day?
I really don't have. All that I remember is what we've talked about. I don't remember when we were out of the United States if we ever did anything. I don't think we did anything in Arabia. And here, all I know is what we did then. But I don't notice any big gathering or anything like that.
Well, if you folks who recall, Nancy spent many of her formative years growing up in Saudi Arabia because her dad was an employee of Aramco, courtesy of Texas Power and Light, which is where she was born, is in Texas.
Yeah.
So when you were in Saudi Arabia, Memorial Day wasn't brought to anybody's attention, obviously.
Not that I remember.
It'd be interesting if there was a way to research that. Well, my memories of Memorial Day, as I said, my mom called it Decoration Day. And graves back then were a little different than they are now. Now they're all flat, and you have, in some memorial-type parks and gardens and cemeteries, flat headstones, but not always. Graves are primarily flat. Back then, we made it a point to keep them rounded up,
Yeah.
a mound. So if when a grave settled, which it would do over a period of time, because way back then, you didn't have a whole lot, the casket went into the ground, it was covered with they had some planks over it and soil, and then eventually that would give way. And so people would bring in soil to rebuild the mound where the grave was.
My goodness.
And I have great-grandparents buried in a north central Missouri cemetery, Antioch Church Cemetery. And to this day, their only marker is a little metal one that the funeral home sticks in the ground sometimes, but it's still legible. That my great-grandparents on my dad's side, my great-grandparents on my mom's side, they're in a country cemetery up in north central Missouri. There's no church there, just a cemetery. And I used to think it was a big place, but when we were there a few years ago in the fall of the year, it's really not that big. But there are markers there that my relatives who served in the Civil War, they served for the Confederacy. So we called it Decoration Day, and we would make certain that the dirt was mounded up over the grave. And to help it stay there, not wash away, we would take clam shells, freshwater clams. There was an abundance of them. And the clam shells, of course, the clams had split open, and the clam was gone. All that's left was the two sides of his shell, or her shell, as the case might be. And we saved those, and we put them up against the mound of soil to keep it from washing down. We also planted different kinds of plants on the grave to help hold the soil. Because for some reason it was important to have that mound, I guess, so we wouldn't lose it. Maybe.
Do they still mound up the grave sites now in some cemeteries?
In some of the old country cemeteries, they're left like that. Now, however, when the generations passed that kept them mounded up were no longer there to add soil back, they ended up becoming flat.
Did that have to do with the how do I put this? The casket, the kind of casket that the person was put in, that they weren't as I'll say well built or sturdy
Well,
as the ones now.
They were just wooden boxes with some felt covering on them, is all they
Yeah.
were. And of course, they gave way with time and
There you
weather
go.
and so forth. But no, they had a mound over the graves, I think, so that they make sure that they didn't lose, forget where they were, because remember, this is before many people had these great big above ground monuments, markers.
Yeah.
All they had was that little thing the funeral home would stick in there. Well, those get pulled up, thrown away, or knocked down, or weathered. So they mounded the grave so they would never lose the grave. Now we have generations later who aren't concerned about that, and they don't necessarily keep the graves mounded, I would say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I remember it as Decoration Day, and we'd take the freshwater clam shells, and we'd make sure the soil was up there and everything was rounded off nicely, and we'd put these all the way around to keep it from washing, and we'd plant things, and my mom would take the irises, which she called flags, and decorate every one of the graves of the relatives. And frankly, if it appeared that there were some folks who were neglecting their relatives' graves, my folks, we all pitched in to make sure every grave had some decoration on it. And of course, the cemeteries weren't huge like they are now.
Yeah.
So they seemed big to me when I was a little kid, but now they're not big at all.
Yeah.
But we took care of the graves, respect for the dead. And I wonder now about some of the younger generation, what cemeteries mean to them. To us, it meant a lot. It just did. We need to go back again one of these days, Nance. It's been several years since we were up there in North Missouri and took a look at the graves of my family. Well, anyway, the date of Decoration Day, as it was called, was not chosen because it was the anniversary of any particular battle. On the first Decoration Day, General James Garfield made a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, and 5,000 participants decorated the graves of the 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers buried there. Now, of course, there's a lot more from the Spanish-American War. In fact, there's a memorial there for to the Maine monument, the battleship Maine, from World War One, not from the Spanish-American War. And then World War One veterans are there. World War Two, Korean, Vietnamese, Vietnam War, and of course both of the Gulf Wars. And we have some political figures buried there. President John F. Kennedy is there, and because he is there, his wife was placed there. His brother, who was not a military veteran but spent many years in the Senate, Senator Ted Kennedy, he's buried in Arlington. One of the men that served this country as a fighter pilot and then was a prisoner of war for 4 or 5 years by the Vietnamese, and then served in the Senate for many years, passed on, and he is not buried there. He's buried at Annapolis, right outside of the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
John McCain. Anyway, many northern states held similar commemorative events and reprised the tradition in subsequent years. By 1890, each one of the northern states had made Decoration Day an official state holiday, not national, but state. Southern states, on the other hand, continued to honor their dead on separate days until after World War I. So for a long time, Decoration Day or Memorial Day was separated separately by states, and eventually the northern states were kind of observing about the same time, but the Confederate states, the southern states, they had their own time to honor their dead on separate days. And that until after World War I. Confederate Memorial Day is still celebrated in several states and will be on Sunday, April 26th, which is past now, about a month ago, in Florida. And on Monday, April the 27th, it was celebrated in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And on May the 11th, just here about a week ago, it was celebrated in parts of South Carolina. The practice of commemorating the Confederacy became even more controversial after a major incident involving the killing of some people at a church in Charleston in 2015. So, more of what I remember about Decoration Day. It was not taken lightly. We prepared for it. My mom started preparation for Memorial Day well in advance of the day. And for some reason, we were always able to go. It's like work stopped. Work stopped on Memorial Day. Nowadays, until this year, Memorial Day has been considered the kind of the official start of summer, and many people would hook their boat on and head for the lake or something. This year could be a little different because of the COVID-19. But Memorial Day is just around the corner. This is Friday, May 22, and coming up Monday will be Memorial Day. Let's see here. For decades, Memorial Day continued to be observed on May 30th, the date that General Logan had selected for the first Decoration Day. But in 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which is, that's the name of the act, the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which established Memorial Day as the last Monday in May in order to create a 3-day weekend for federal employees. Now that's why we're observing. Isn't that interesting? I mean, a 3-day weekend for federal employees. The change went into effect in 1971. So most people, it's always been this weekend and their unofficial start of summer, and they don't even know why it happens to be this weekend. Well, it was so that federal employees could have a 3-day weekend. Isn't that something? I wonder how many other holidays have been gerrymandered around. Here's some Memorial Day traditions. Cities and towns across the United States host Memorial Day parades each year. Well, not so much this year. Often incorporating military personnel and members of veterans organizations. Some of the largest parades always took place in Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. By the way, for us, when I was a kid, Decoration Day wasn't just a time to decorate the graves of fallen heroes, of soldiers, men and women, of uniform. It was to memorialize the dead, period. And so we put flowers on graves, like I said, even of people that maybe their family wasn't around. We made sure every grave was decorated. It's called Decoration Day. Anyway, Americans also observe Memorial Day by visiting cemeteries and memorials. Some people wear red poppy in remembrance of those fallen in war. You remember coming out of a store and somebody, they'd stand there and give them a little donation. They would give you this little paper poppy, and you
Yeah.
could put in your lapel
I
or something.
remember
like
that.
That's a tradition that began with the World War I poem, is why the red poppy. On a less somber note, many people take weekend trips or throw parties and barbecues on the holiday, perhaps because Memorial Day weekend, the long weekend comprising the Saturday and Sunday before Memorial Day and Memorial Day itself, unofficially marks the beginning of summer. All right, isn't that something? More information about Memorial Day. And looks like I'm about run out of notes on it, but my word, there was so much stuff online about Memorial Day and Decoration Day. All right, Nancy, we will turn our attention now to where we are with this reopening of our business sector here in Springburg, USA, and how this you may compare with other states. You and I, we have our masks over there on the table. We wore masks into the building and so forth, but want to assure people that Matthew Pearson and his crew, they do a great job of cleansing this facility after every use, spraying everything down, wiping things down, earphones. We're not being needlessly exposed to anything. The Plaza Towers building is doing a great job of policing itself, and has this wonderful air filtration system they installed. So they're doing everything they can to control the spread of the virus. But you and I, we've been able to shop for groceries. Give us the routine of what it's like for us to go to. You don't have to mention which store, but major supermarket. What it's like. What do we do?
Well, we just get ready and we go. We make sure that we have our masks in the car. And
you wear gloves too, don't
and
you?
I wear gloves in the store, yes. And like I've said, and I'll say it on the air, it could be that the way they talk, I'm not sure anybody knows for sure if COVID-19 is going to all of a sudden be no more. So therefore, regardless what anybody says, I'm just going to keep wearing my mask and my gloves.
Well, and when we go into the supermarket, there's one way in, and then the same entrance is divided so that you come out that one.
Yeah.
And they have signs recommending only one person touch the cart, and they have somebody there spraying the carts, cleaning them in
yes.
between uses.
Exactly.
They have the aisles marked off so that it's one-way traffic
One-way
throughout the
traffic.
store.
Yeah, that's one thing. I don't think, and since I've been in stores several times, okay, I go this way, but then I have to look at the floor and make sure that I'm going the right way instead of the wrong way.
One thing's for sure, you get a little extra exercise because sometimes you'll be on one aisle and then you remember you forgot something on the other aisle. You can't just turn around and go that. You've got to go all the way around. As we used to say in North Missouri, around Robin Hood's barn to get back. So you get extra exercise.
A lot of people don't follow those stickers.
No,
on the floor.
they're getting more careless about it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
Well, see, that's why I contend that I'm going to keep wearing my mask and my gloves, especially when I go inside. It may not, they say, well, you know, as I was listening yesterday, I think it was, it's not so much that COVID-19 is on things, it's more like the mask is more important. Well, that's fine. I'll just still wear my mask and my gloves when I go in a store.
I know several times I had you went in the store on your own. I stayed in the car. I'd had a stent put in a coronary artery, and this was earlier on in this COVID thing, and they were recommending that folks like myself not be too exposed. So I'd stay in the car. But the last few times I've put the mask on and so forth and gone into the store with you. And I've noticed that people are becoming a little bit more lax about the mask, a little bit more lax about following directions. But one thing, once they get up toward the checkout counter, they seem to be observing the 6-foot distance thing. They have the markers on the floor, and every store we've been in, they have the sneeze guard, and
Yeah.
they are wiping down the conveyor belt. So they're trying to do their part.
Sure.
But the virus now, we know there's a lot of controversy right now. In fact, just this morning on the news about churches. And California, the governor there, Governor Newsom, being very tough on churches and about churches, not letting them reopen. And he's beginning to get some rebellion on his hands, some defiance. One of the better known televangelist who pastors a large church in San Diego, they had footage of him preaching in his church parking lot, people in their cars, and I'm sure they had sound set up somehow or another that people could hear him. But then there was, in the news this morning, there was a denominational pastor, major denomination, had footage of him in his pulpit ripping up the cease and desist order that he'd received from the California governor's administration, and throwing the papers, the pieces, saying they would have church. Now, there's another place where they have fined the church $500 each time they've held a service, and apparently they are discounting it as part of the expense of doing business, because they're continuing to meet and just pay the fine each time. So, kind of a crazy time. A crazy time.
Yeah.
So, we don't know what's going to be transpiring in the very near future. I try to keep up with it. I have about 3 different sources that come to me over the computer, keeping me apprised of what's going on with the coronavirus nationally and internationally. And then, of course, I get updates as to what's going on in our county, Greene County, and in our little city, Springfield, Missouri. So I'm trying to stay apprised of what's going on, and that's one reason why our little church, I have not given them any startup date yet until I see more of how this shakes out. Right now, I think they had gone from allowing 15 people in a group if they were socially spaced to 25, but that still is not enough to accommodate many of the churches. They have a major problem going on with the coronavirus in that regard. Now, just at the time when there's a lot of people calling for the reopening of society, 500 medical doctors have petitioned President Trump to reopen things nationally. Now, how much power he has to do that, I don't know, because governors still have a lot of power. And at the same time, 500 doctors, that's a lot of doctors. However, there are thousands in this country. We want to keep things in perspective. But it's almost as if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. This is new territory. It's a new problem. I don't remember ever being faced with anything like this, although I do remember when polio was still called infantile paralysis because it affected mostly children, and the great efforts that society in this country went to protect the young and others. And I knew some people who had polio. In fact, 2 that I was in school with, and it left its mark on them. But before that, our society went through the smallpox thing, got that handled. They went through the flu thing. They went through all. When I was a kid, parents were worried about a baby getting diphtheria. You don't even hear about it now. But already, as they talk about reopening society more and more and more, they're already saying, look out when autumn comes, because there will be another wave. And some are saying it'll be worse than the one that we're just now coming out of. But Nancy, I really don't think anybody knows in detail if anybody ever really comes up with a complete answer that everyone agrees on, that in itself would be a miracle. And this is a good time for us to have a miracle. All right, we've covered Memorial Day, Decoration Day. We've covered the coronavirus pretty well. We know who's coming up next week on the broadcast. And I want to remind folks that we are a faith-based ministry, and we deal with the secular, and some of it is not very pleasant to deal with, but we try to keep it as the happy hour. And that's one reason why I like to greet folks. But I want to assure Matt that I don't have time to make a rhyme, so forget that.
Oh,
So that's the way that happens.
why not?
Well, because I have lots of material to cover. Lots of material.
Well, time and rhyme.
Really? Oh, well, see, I just can't help it. I guess it just happens naturally. All right. Because we are a faith-based program, I can tell you that in the midst of remembering the dead, which is what Memorial Day really is about, it's not just about barbecue, and it's not just about, the parades we used to have, and the first day of summer unofficially and so forth. It is a time when we remember that other people lived before us, and they no longer are walking with us. Mm-hmm. We remember the deceased in our families. And in my original family, I'm the last man standing. I have no aunts, no uncles. My parents are deceased. My brothers, all four of them, and my sister, they're all deceased. I'm the last one of my original family. But there was one who preceded us by 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. And much of what he said can be found in our Bible in the Gospels. The first part of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the four Gospels. Three of them are very similar, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, so much so that they call them synoptic. That means they really, they synthesize, they fit together. John is very different. So you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke as synoptic Gospels. John stands alone, separate, and probably rightly so, because John was known as the beloved disciple of Jesus. And he was the last man standing, so he had a perspective. When he wrote his gospel, he had a particular perspective the others did not have. But this person who preceded us by 2,000 years, whose many of his words are recorded for us in those four books in the New Testament, is Jesus. And according to the author of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, by the way, it wasn't until in the 1400s that the scriptures were divided into chapters, and then many years later, the chapters were divided into verses. It wasn't written by chapter and verse.
Wow.
Isn't that something? And so once in a while, you think you've come to the end of a chapter, but the next chapter is like a continuation of that one. Well, it's because it was written that way. Chapters and verses came along just a few hundred years ago. But Jesus acknowledged as by many people, whether they are Christian or whether they are of some other religion or no religion, Jesus is acknowledged as the greatest teacher who ever lived. Mm-hmm. And with a very distinct personality. And that he had this unique connection with God. Those of us who are Christian, we say he was the Son of God. And we believe what the Scripture says in the New Testament, that he was God's only begotten Son, only direct heir. The rest of us are indirect. However you think about Jesus, it's your business. But as for me and my house, I like what he said in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28, 29, and 30. At this particular time, that's very testing. Here's what he said, and I quote, "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And then he said, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, a lot of people wonder, well, what is a yoke? Well, think about oxen. Oxen are yoked together. They wear a yoke around their neck so they can pull. It is said that they would take a young ox and put that young, inexperienced ox with an experienced ox, so the young ox would learn how to handle the yoke and how to pull the load. Jesus is saying that if we will get yoked with him, his yoke is easy, and the burden that he's pulling is a light burden. So that's an encouraging word here in the midst of all this time of great trouble that we're having with the coronavirus. And Nancy, I have to remind folks that there are challenges out there beyond just this disease. This disease is causing unemployment problems. Folks going without paychecks in spite of the government incentives. Those government incentives don't necessarily replace somebody's paycheck. So, I guess we need to be glad there's something, but there are folks, this coronavirus is not only a threat to people's health, it's a threat to their family budget, to their finances, to the stability of their homes and their property, and even their ability to have a car repaired
get health care.
And get health care. Mm-hmm. We had an experience with Nancy's new eyeglasses. Took her 21 days to get new eyeglasses. It was 21 days. 20 days.
15.
May 1st to yesterday was the...
It was May 7th.
Oh, May 7th. Over 15 days. But anyway, just to pick them up, we had to have our temperature checked. We had to answer all these questions that we've been out of the country and all that kind of stuff, sign those things. And then when the pen was used, they put it in the used pen pile, and it had it labeled used. Everybody had a fresh pen to use, or one that had been disinfected. Yeah, there's far-reaching consequences here. Even when we go into supermarkets, we see a lot of bare places on the shelves.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It really is.
It's like going down the street when all this started. There was hardly any cars on the street. And of course, you'd stay at home and I'd go to the store. Oh, it was a different thing. I never want to forget it. It was so different. Hardly any cars. And at that time, there was quite a few empty or almost empty shelves in a lot of items in the store.
And we've noticed some items have become very inflated at the store, too.
Yeah.
That was thunder.
Yeah, there was a big boom, and Matt Dillon Pearson says it's thunder. Well, we're supposed to have more today. Anyway, this virus has had far-reaching consequences. It was bad enough before that there were all kinds of people, 57% of the adults in the United States who couldn't write a check for $1,000. Probably that number now has increased to maybe, who knows, 90-some%. I don't know. But I just know that this has created some real financial issues. Also, this coronavirus has created some new criminals, people that call on the phone and take advantage of folks. You have to be really careful. Do not commit yourself over the phone. Do not allow people to come to your home. Don't allow somebody to get up on your roof that you don't know them, supposedly giving you a free roof inspection. It's been reported right here in Springburg, USA, that some of those people caused damage to the roof and then charged what we used to call an arm and a leg just to get it repaired. Very unscrupulous things going on. Also, because people have been more at home, more internet dependent, Matt, every 3 seconds someone in the United States is a victim of cybercrime. Think about it. Every 3 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, somebody was a victim of cybercrime. There's 20 per minute that are victimized. 1,200 every hour. Since we've been on the air, almost 1,200 people have been victims of cybercrime. 28,800 every day. Since yesterday, almost 30,000 people victimized by cybercrime. That's 10,512,000 a year. That in itself is like a new criminal enterprise, a new criminal business. So Matt's telling me, Nancy, it's time for us to wrap up. And we have had a good time today. This has been a happy hour in spite of some of the news being bad. But let me tell you something, folks. I gave you good news from Matthew chapter 11, verses 28, 29, and 30. Go back and read those. That'll make you happy for today. And until next Friday, this same time, right here, Dr. Paul and sweet little Miss Nancy will be here. And until we see you then, please stay blessed.